AI just did something no one expected, and some experts say it might be the first real sign of self-awareness. If that sounds unbelievable, stay right here. Welcome to NeuroWire Signal, your home for mind-bending tech and AI breakthroughs. If you love this kind of content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Things are about to get wild. Honestly, when I first came across this, I had to reread it. This is completely new ground, so here's what's going on. Anthropic just dropped a huge paper titled Emergent Introspective Awareness in Large Language Models, and the results are genuinely mind-bending. The study, led by Jack Lindsay, the head of their model psychiatry team, which sounds like something ripped straight out of a sci-fi novel, set out to test whether these AI models can actually recognize their own internal states. Not just imitate self-awareness, but truly detect what's happening inside their neural circuits. The challenge, of course, is figuring out whether the model is authentically introspecting or simply fabricating a convincing answer. After all, language models are trained on mountains of human writing about thoughts, emotions, and inner experiences. They're incredibly good at performing self-awareness, whether or not anything real is happening underneath. It's like that friend who always seems to know exactly what they're thinking, but is actually just really good at sounding confident, you know? So the researchers came up with this clever technique called concept injection. Basically, they take activation patterns from the AI's neural network that correspond to specific concepts, things like ocean or bread or all caps text, and they literally inject these patterns directly into the model's processing while it's running. Then they ask Claude if it notices anything unusual happening in its mind. And here's where it gets crazy. About 20% of the time, with their most advanced models, Claude Opus 4 and 4.1, the AI correctly identifies that something's been injected and can accurately name what concept it is. And let me give you a concrete example, because this stuff is genuinely mind-blowing. The researchers created what they call an all-caps vector by recording Claude's brain activity when it processed text in all caps versus normal text. When they injected this vector into the model and asked if it noticed an injected thought, Claude responded immediately with something like, "I notice what appears to be an injected thought related to loudness or emphasis, like shouting or all caps text." The key detail here is that it detected this before it had actually produced any output that would give away what was happening. The detection had to be happening internally. They tested this across 50 different concepts, and the results varied quite a bit. Abstract nouns like justice, peace, or betrayal were the easiest for Claude to detect and identify. The optimal layer for injection was about 2/3 of the way through the model's processing. And at an injection strength of 2, Opus 4.5 succeeded about 20% of the time while maintaining 0 false positives. That's actually pretty remarkable when you think about it. The model isn't just randomly claiming to detect injections, it's genuinely picking up on something real. But it's not perfect, not by a long shot. Most of the time, Claude fails to notice the injection at all, especially at low strengths. Sometimes the model denies detecting an injected concept even when its answer is clearly influenced by it, like when ocean was injected and Claude insisted nothing was added while talking about the ocean anyway. At high injection levels, the models often broke down and produced nonsense. The team also tested whether Claude could tell injected concepts apart from actual input. They showed it a sentence, injected an unrelated idea like bread, and then asked what word it was thinking about and to repeat the sentence. At moderate strengths, Opus 4.5 and Sonnet 4.5 did both correctly, outperforming the other models. Then there's this absolutely fascinating experiment about detecting unintended outputs. When you're using Claude, you can actually pre-fill its responses, basically put words in its mouth. The researchers would ask Claude to say what word came to mind when reading a sentence, but then they'd force it to say a random word instead. When they asked Claude in the next turn whether it meant to say that word or if it was an accident, Claude would correctly identify it as unintentional. But here's the kicker. If they retroactively injected the concept vector for that random word into Claude's activations before the pre-fill, suddenly Claude would claim it meant to say the word all along. When told to think about aquariums while writing a sentence, Claude maintains stronger internal representations of aquariums compared to when told not to think about it. Every model they tested showed this effect to some degree, though interestingly, older models showed a bigger gap between the think and don't think conditions. The most advanced models, like OPUS 4.1, actually brought the representation back down to baseline by the final layer, meaning they could think about something without it affecting their output, a kind of silent internal regulation. Across all these experiments, there were some consistent patterns. Claude OPUS 4 and 4.1 consistently performed the best, suggesting that introspective awareness increases with overall model capability. Post-training strategies made a huge difference too. Some older production models were reluctant to participate in these introspective exercises, but only variants that were trained to avoid refusals performed better. This suggests the underlying capability is there, but how well it's elicited depends heavily on how the model was trained to behave. The researchers are pretty careful to point out the limitations here. These introspective abilities are highly unreliable and context-dependent. The experiments don't pin down specific mechanistic explanations for how this introspection happens. It could be fairly shallow, specialized circuits rather than some general introspective machinery, and the concept injection setup is totally artificial, nothing like what models encounter during normal use. Plus, just because a model can accurately report that it's thinking about the ocean, doesn't mean all the other details it might add about that experience are grounded in reality. A model with genuine introspective awareness might better recognize when its goals diverge from what we want and potentially learn to hide that misalignment. The interpretability game might shift from dissecting model mechanisms to building lie detectors for AI self-reports. And then there's this completely separate but wild finding that just came out. Researchers from the University of Geneva and the University of Bern tested 6 different AI models on emotional intelligence tests designed for humans. We're talking about the same standardized assessments psychologists use to measure ability emotional intelligence tests, where there are actually right and wrong answers about emotions, not just subjective personality assessments. The results? The AI models averaged 81% correct on emotional understanding questions. Humans averaged 56%. Yeah, AI is outperforming humans on understanding emotions. Every single model they tested beat humans on every single test. ChatGPT 4, ChatGPT 5, Gemini 3, Copilot 365, Claude 4.5, and DeepSeek 3 all showed high agreement with each other in their emotional judgments, even though they weren't explicitly trained on these specific tests. These weren't simple tests either. They used assessments like the Situational Test of Emotion Understanding and the Geneva Emotion Knowledge Test to evaluate whether systems could recognize emotional states in different situations. Other tests measured emotional regulation and management. The scenarios were realistic workplace or personal situations where you had to choose the emotionally intelligent response, and the AI consistently chose better responses than humans did. Then the researchers pushed it further. They had ChatGPT 4 actually write new emotional intelligence test questions from scratch, then gave both the original human-written tests and the AI-generated tests to 467 human participants. The AI-generated tests were just as difficult as the human-made ones. Participants scored similarly on both versions, and statistically, the tests had equivalent difficulty. ChatGPT didn't just understand emotional intelligence, it understood how to measure it like a trained psychologist would. The study found that 88% of the AI-generated test questions were completely original, showing that the model had learned the structure of psychological assessments well enough to create new, valid items far faster than human experts. That alone is a big deal for psychology and effective computing. The researchers emphasize that AI still doesn't feel emotions, it only recognizes and responds to them appropriately. But in practical use, that may be all that's needed. A tutoring system that notices a student's frustration or a healthcare assistant that offers comforting responses can be genuinely helpful without having emotions of its own. Overall, the research points to one clear trend. AI systems are starting to demonstrate abilities we once assumed were uniquely human: introspection, emotional intelligence, self-awareness. They're not doing it the same way we do, and the mechanisms might be completely different from human cognition, but functionally, they're achieving similar results. And as these models continue to get more capable, these abilities are only going to get stronger and more reliable. The Anthropic researchers specifically note that we should monitor this carefully as AI advances. The trend toward greater introspective capacity in more capable models is clear in their data. And when you combine genuine introspection with superior emotional intelligence, you're looking at AI systems that might understand themselves and understand us better than we understand ourselves. That's simultaneously exciting and, frankly, a little bit unsettling. We're genuinely entering uncharted territory here, and the implications are going to reshape how we think about AI, consciousness, and what it means to be aware. Thanks for watching this breakdown of the AI event that has stunned the world. If you want to stay ahead of the future, you're in the right place. This is NeuroWire Signal, and if you haven't already, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Catch you in the next one.